Pablo. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Pablo, today we have a Texas trailblazer with us. We have Judge Linda Yanez. Judge Linda Yanez, she was appointed by Ann Richards to the Texas 13 Court of Appeals. And she was the first Latina appellate Texas judge ever to sit on a Texas appellate court. So, but not only that, authored hundreds of court opinions, both criminally and civilly. She's taught at various continuing legal education courses, and she has taught at the prestigious trial advocacy program for Harvard University. And in 1992, she served as the head of the immigration team for Clinton Gore. Welcome, Judge Linda Yanez. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you.
And how have you been handling this COVID crisis, and also being a grandmother and having to homeschool your grandchildren?
Well, I'll tell you what, that's the way to cope. Is that I get up every morning early to get ready and get them ready. There's a 4-year-old, 6-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And get everything ready, and then I'm supervising the 4-year-old virtual classes, and they have the attention span of a first year DA. Okay. And so it keeps me busy. They are, they're so, my little grandson, he's 4, Javi, is so inquisitive, so curious, so fun, so interesting, but it's also very challenging because of, technology, and there isn't, every couple of days something goes wrong and nobody knows, what to do. And I know that every parent out there who's doing this knows what I'm talking about, but it certainly fills the day, and you feel like you had a purpose that day. So.
And in your opinion, is it harder teaching your grandchildren or teaching the third-year law school students there at Harvard?
That is an interesting question, because before teaching just the trial advocacy classes, I teach every January, and I've been doing it since 1992. So I think I'm one of the longest serving faculty members there. But I used to be a full-time clinical instructor at Harvard Law School, and David Hall, from TRLA, he received a call as a reference when I was being considered for that position. And he said that what he thought sold them on me was that he said, she taught first graders at Weslaco public schools. If she can handle first graders, she can handle Harvard law students. And he said, I think that's what puts you over on the job. So.
That's funny, Judge. We were talking right before you came on here and talking about the stories, how much our lives, my life, has overlapped with yours and stuff you've done. I actually went to school in Chicago, Kent. You started practicing over there, and Pato actually interned with us as undergrad. Reggie, your daughter, worked in our office the first year when she was licensed. And David Hall, my former executive director, who hired me at TRLA about 23 years ago. Folks might not know this, but you kind of referenced it. He's the one that forced you to apply to law school back when you were a teacher, right?
Yes, that is correct. We were both working on the McGovern presidential campaign for, the Democratic Party, and the Rasul Nida gubernatorial candidate. And he said, you need to go to law school. And I was like, no, I'm a teacher. I have a child, I gave him all the reasons why that wouldn't be possible, but he just stayed on me. So yes, I have to be grateful to him for that.
Many of us are. I don't know if people realize just the history. I mean, he's one of the probably Texas best litigators you ever had, and he chose to live down here and be part of trial in Weslaco, in this area in South Texas. Until recently, that he retired, that he moved on over closer to his family. But he did made major differences in many people's lives, including yours. And it's a great story that I hear.
One of a kind, because he started with the ACLU here, and then he was the creator of what is now, TRLA, and people don't know what an amazing lawyer he is. We all know what an amazing person he is, and manager, and organizationally putting together the legal services program, and the compassion and the drive and discipline and all of that. But he's also an amazing lawyer, because we got to work together, litigating, and he really is.
Obviously, right now in your background there, Judge, you have an icon that recently passed away about a little over a week ago, RBG, and I wanted to see, maybe you wanted to say your thoughts right now, being so fresh in our minds, just the impact that she leaves behind.
Yeah, I really felt it, that in the moment that Amparo told me what had happened. She just happened to be on the phone, and I was really, struck and saddened when I heard it. And as I started, listening to all of the different, pundits and, commentators on her, I was remembering that all of John Escamilla, who just recently moved to Austin, but he was my law clerk. And one day he calls me up and he said, "Judge, you need to watch the CNN, I think it was CNN that did a biography on Ruth Bader Ginsburg." He said, "You need to watch it." He says, "Because I was just mesmerized by it, because I kept thinking about you." He says, "You two have so much in common." And that struck me when he told me that. And then when I heard about the passing, I thought about it. And so I did a post, on Facebook about our sort of common path. And I said, she was, someone she was 5 feet tall. I said she was a, pint-sized sort of powerhouse from Brooklyn. I said, and I am 5 feet tall. And I said, and I'm, sort of a pint-sized Mexican kid from, the cotton fields of South Texas and the vegetable fields of Illinois. And she comes from a civil rights background, with all the wonderful work she has done, to advance women. And really not just women, but people, I would say, to advance people, and not to be discriminated against on those bases. And I said, and I come from the civil rights background, with legal services in Illinois and Texas, and working on immigrants' rights. I said, and we both put everything we had into fighting in the federal courts for the rights of those groups. I said, we both taught law, and so I was sort of showing the similar path that we had taken. And then I was noting that she had said that the best life that you can live is to take your God-given talent and use it to its full potential to make a difference in the world. And I said, she was given intellectual talent in spades, above most mortals, right? I said, I was given a little bit, and I took that and tried to make a difference in my little corner of the world. So the real lesson about her and her life, there's many, but I think at the core, it is that. And that is, you don't have to be a Supreme Court justice or a president to make a difference. Take what you have and make a difference in your world, in your universe. And that's what makes the world a better place. So.
Whoa, well put. Well put. And Judge Linda Yanez, can you tell our listeners what is your story? How did you end up on the 13th Court of Appeals?
As we were talking about, David Hall a little bit about, when Pablo was mentioning him, that I was a school teacher, and I became involved in a political campaign, and David at that time was sort of running the office with the Democratic Party. And at that time, there was a law in the books in Texas that children who had not been lawfully admitted into the country could not attend public school, right? And I was a teacher in Weslaco, and some of my students were part of what at the time was called the labor camps. And I went to visit there because of my students, and I saw that some siblings were in school and some were not. And I was like, what is this about? And it was that they had not been admitted by the school. At that time, the way that statute was being interpreted by the schools was that a school official in the admissions office determined if someone had, quote, been lawfully admitted into the United States. And I was just a school teacher. I'm not versed in the law at all. But I went, even as a teacher, I went before the school board in Weslaco and was like, what is this? We have kids that are in school, that are not in school, who live here, whose siblings are in school. They're not going anywhere. Their families live here. Their parents live here. And, sort of that type of an argument. And I talked to David about it, and he was like, you want to make a difference, Linda? You really want to make a difference? You need that law license, right? You need to go to law. And that's kind of where it all started. And I didn't think I could at the time in my personal life. I didn't feel lived in a place where I could do such a thing. And, he stayed on me and pushed me. But that was that kernel in my head. So I tell people when I went to law school, I had a purpose. I was sitting around with a bunch of colleagues and they were talking about why did you go to law school? Oh, Vietnam was, hot, and I didn't, I really didn't want to go to war. Oh, well, I didn't know what else to do. Oh, well, my father was a lawyer, and so on. And I said, well, this is why I did, because I really knew that I wanted to use that license to go out and see if I could make a difference on issues that I had experienced myself. One is a little kid growing up in Riondo, and then what I had seen as a school teacher. So that was the motivator, if you will.
You're doing this at a time when there's not a lot of women in the legal profession, let alone on the benches here in Texas.
Oh, absolutely. When I was in law school, because I graduated in 76, okay, there were less than 1% of the students were Latinas. I want to say women were around a little over 10%. And then Black women, I want to say, was around 5%. We were the lowest number of students, law students, to then become lawyers. And I think it's very difficult for your generation to understand what that's like. My daughters are lawyers, and now I just heard, like a few days ago, that more than 50% of law students in America are women now. And so the profession is, now being dominated by women. But when I came in, yes, no. And I have to tell you the story. When I took the Illinois bar exam, I was 8.5 months pregnant with Amparo. And when I reported, we took the test at Northwestern, a bar person came up to me and said, we'd like to know if you would mind taking the test in another room from the large group, because
you wouldn't scare the man, Judge, or what?
Yes, no, that is exactly what happened. They said that some guys had come to them and said, look, they had seen me at the bar review courses, right? And they said, that woman over there is so pregnant that they were afraid that I would go into labor during the test and disrupt the test and ruin their lives. So I, in fact, did take the test in another room, which was fine with me because I had a table instead of sitting in the little chairs, in this big auditorium. But that was the atmosphere when I came into the
That's interesting. You know, so many years later, I don't know if you know about this. It's just this year alone, the Board of Law Examiners of Texas just allowed for women to take hygiene products, feminine hygiene products, wear them into the exam. They would prohibit
Yes, I
those.
read about that.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think about that mentality still being there. And I think the question that I think the way I was kind of talking to F about this issue earlier is like the implicit bias discussion happens a lot lately, you know, in the profession, in our culture. And I told them that I think at times, I know when I walk into a courtroom, you know, as having been involved with the bar association, having done jury trials, how you can tell when somebody has to pin you and stereotype you and having a certain bias about you. And I can imagine in your case, it must have been tenfold, like a Latino from the Valley. And there's nothing more satisfying than to turn that around and having learned a lesson. I'm wondering how, if you had, I'm sure you have several examples of that, when you walked into stereotypes that you knew about you, that you just kind of flipped them, you know, and people came out thinking differently about race, gender, and other matters.
I started out with a special project, which was an immigration project with the Legal Assistance Foundation of Chicago. And that's when the Legal Services Corporation first allotted funds to represent immigrants. It was in fact, I want to say it was the very first project in the country. And then from there, California and then Texas, you know, and other programs started. But I was a staff attorney with that very first project. Legal services lawyers, I think, were much more comfortable with, you know, having this, you know, I was very young and very small, you know, and those kinds of things matter, I think, in our profession. But I am a very energetic person, and people think I'm kind of hyper now. And I said, you should have known me, you know, but it's during my youth. And I just went at it. I mean, I went at it fiercely. And so I used to argue with the Border Patrol agents. Like, I have to tell you this story. We got a call from a union at a factory in Chicago. And they called our legal services program because one of the union activists knew us, right? Knew the legal services community, and called us and said, there's a raid right now. Immigration is here. And it was a very large factory, and they were going up and down the lines, and they were just indiscriminately, discriminately looking. And if you looked Mexican, they were asking for your documents to be in the country. It was just, that's the way things went. So we raced over there. Me being my supervising lawyer, who was this Jewish guy, you know, from Chicago, Kalman resident, wonderful guy, and myself, we ended up going over there. And the union people let us into the building while the raid is going on. So I'm running around telling everybody not to answer the question. I said, you don't have to answer any questions. Do not answer any questions. And these huge they weren't Border Patrol, they were immigration investigators, you know, come up to me and tell me, who the hell are you and what are you doing here? You know, and they told me to get out. And I said, I was invited in. I'm not a trespasser. And they said, if you don't get out of here, we are going to arrest you and charge you with obstruction of justice, of the federal, whatever they were calling, you know, what they were doing. And I didn't want to get out, right? And so Kalman is like, I think we need to, so we got out of the building, and then I went and grabbed a chair, and they were putting them on buses. And I went and grabbed a chair and stood on top of the chair and was yelling and screaming at everybody through the windows of the buses, just saying, do not answer the question, do not answer. You don't have to tell them, you don't have to tell them your name, you don't say anything, right? And then they took them off to the immigration office, and I raced over there. I got there, and in the meantime, some of the family members had called our office. So then, remember, there were no cell phones, no computers, no nothing. There were only landlines. And so somehow they got a hold of somebody that sent us a message. And so I went to a payphone there at the immigration office there in the federal building in Chicago and called back, and they gave me some names. Okay, these are relatives who have been arrested in this raid. So I had some names. So I go over there and I said, I need to speak to, Pablo Almaguer, Efrain Molina. And they go back and they come back and they say, they don't know who you are, And I'm like, I know they don't know who I am. I'm here because their family called me and I need to speak to them. And I'm a lawyer. They need to ask for you. So we went back and forth with that. And I'm not kidding you. There was a physicality to it because they would literally get in my face, even though they were, I was here and they were there, yelling at me. And I pulled out the CFR, 8 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, and I said, I am a lawyer. Here's my, my notice of representation. And finally, they had to let me in. So I went and I started interviewing they were women. And I gave them, I just wrote out a card and I said, I gave them the Fifth Amendment and how to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights. You don't have to answer. You don't have to tell them anything. You don't have to tell them. They didn't even have these people's names, I learned, right? And so I gave it to these women. And we tried to tell everybody this. But this particular group of women, they listened to me. So and then other lawyers started arriving, private lawyers started arriving at the building as well. So my clients, I said, don't do it. Don't answer any questions. Don't even give them your name. So they went back into detention. And then the other lawyers were telling their people to give information. And so they could get a bond set. So my people did not get bonds because they refused to, quote, cooperate. So then they took them in to interview them. And so I'm sitting there going, they're not, what do you mean interview them? They're asserting their Fifth Amendment right. And they did. These women were brave, were Mexican, and they would not answer the questions. And so then the officer, one of the officers, I'll never forget this, he said, well, what am I supposed to do? And I said, exactly. Because you have zero information. You need to release them. That's what you're supposed to do. And they wouldn't. So I immediately went to a judge, at that time, an immigration judge, and asked for, what are my clients being charged? So the orders to show cause basically said that they were arrested for entering the country without inspection at an unknown place, at an unknown time, because they didn't have the information. We had a big fight over that. And then the other people who were being set bonds were being released. And I think you have to understand the dynamics of this. We're pressuring the people that I was talking to because they said, you're stupid. Because look, you're going to be sitting here in jail because your lawyer is trying to make some points over there and you're not going to get a bond, right? And even some of the lawyers were telling me that, like, if they cooperate, look, they're setting bonds for, $1,000, whatever they were setting them for. And I said, I'm letting my clients make up their mind, but I'm advising them of the rights that they have. So my clients ended up being detained for a little bit longer time. But then when we finally got before a judge, there's also a rule in immigration proceedings that anything that you say in an immigration cannot be used against you in a deportation proceeding. And so, we went there and they were released eventually. And this, to make a long story short, we stayed under those circumstances for literally months and year, and in the end, they ended up legalizing in the end, but they never took the voluntary departure. They were never deported. So that was the kind of guts that I had at 27 years old, right? And I did things that I'm thinking, I look back now and I'm like, oh my God, I could have been arrested, I could have all of these things. But at the moment, it was what I felt, that I needed to do. I was so immersed in the righteousness of what I felt that we were doing So I was never, how can I explain this? I felt no one ever made me feel like less than them with respect to female, male, because I was just so engrossed in the substance of my work.
So to put it in layman's terms, you kind of had the eye of the tiger.
Yeah. I mean, and I was just fighting that fight every single day with all the energy that I could, put into it. And in the end, it it actually worked for me. It really did. This is what I tell, young lawyers. I never ever had an ambition beyond getting that license and making a difference on issues that I cared about. I had people that I went to law school with who couldn't wait to get that first PI case, that $1 million case. I went to school with people who wanted to they already knew they were going to be a judge. I that didn't even enter my mind, even in the slightest, not ever, not at all. When I became a lawyer, I expected to be a practicing lawyer in the trenches for my entire career. That's what I expected. That's where my ambitions were. And so I tell young lawyers, do your work well. Whatever you have in front of you in that moment, throw yourself into it and do it well. And people will notice that. To 1993, I literally was sitting at home and I get a phone call. And I was asked if I would consider being appointed to the 13th Court of Appeals.
You're being very humble when you say you were asked. You were asked by Ann Richards, right?
Well, I mean, by her surrogate, but that is literally what happened. I answered the phone and I was asked, and I said, what are you talking about? I didn't even know it. Again, I didn't even know there was a position and that there was some politics going on in that moment, and people had tried to, had put their names in to be. I didn't even know that process was taking place, existed, nothing.
Do you know what you did that put you on that radar?
I had not been involved in politics at that level. In other words, I wasn't out there trying to be a judge or trying to lobby anybody to be a judge. I was just doing my work. Therefore, I also didn't have any enemies because I wasn't out there playing that game. And in fact, I was told that by a political person. They said that when they were talking to people and people were applying and people were saying they wanted to be that position and so on, that my name came up and there were no objections, and that the governor had learned that there had never been a Latina appellate judge in Texas ever. And so she wanted to make an appointment that was going to be historic. So then that eliminated, I think, people other than Latinas for consideration. And they, and when and there were other people who had submitted their names that wanted to be considered. Again, I knew nothing about this. I literally knew nothing about it. And so again, when my name came up, apparently it was like, oh, I think my reputation was of being a very zealous, lawyer for my client. And I had done the work that I had done and worked on the cases that I had worked on. And I had received so much notoriety for substantive work, for cases that changed people's lives, that the school, that Brownsville was keeping kids out of school who were U.S. citizens based on their interpretation of what was somebody who was lawfully admitted. We had our statistics. We were ready. But when we went into that courtroom, we had every news outlet, national, local, international, everybody in Brownsville. We walk in, the courtroom is packed. There were people out in the halls for this hearing. We walk in, David Hall was with me, and all these lawyers, and we had it all planned. And the state had all of their local lawyers, the AG's office, the TA, all of the lawyers on the other side. We walk in, Judge Rella comes in, and we're getting ready to get started, and kind of everybody's talking. And then he just, pounds on the bench and said, okay, counsel, on this table, the only one who can speak is Tony Martinez. He was the lawyer for the school district. And on this side, the only one who can speak is Linda Yanez, because she's the only one that has a live mic. And I almost passed out. And I looked at David and I said, David, what's going on here? I can't do this. We're a team here. And he said, ask for a few minutes. And so I asked for a few minutes. He got off the bench, and I told David, I'm going to throw up. I mean, what? I can't do this. We're supposed to be, everybody had different witnesses they were going to take, different arguments they were going to make. And David says, you can do it. You can do it. I was like, oh my God. I said, we're not going to ask for a continuance? No. So we started, and I took on the witnesses. And I'll tell you, it was one of those where I'm examining the witnesses and people kept shoving notes in my face. Every lawyer wanted me to ask. It was the most intense moment I've ever had in my life. We finished the hearing. The judge, says that he's going to take everything under advisement and will let us know his decision. He left. He was halfway off the bench, and we're all standing up. The judge is halfway off the bench. And then he stops, and he turns around, and he walks back on the bench, and he looks over at Tony and says, how long will it take you to get ready to let these kids into school? And Tony just looked at me, and he's like, Your Honor. And he says, okay, how about my Monday? And he ruled right then and there. And he ruled that the children had to be admitted into Brownsville. And he dissolved the restraining order and did not grant, an injunction. And he walked off the bench, and we're all standing there just stunned, at how we had what. That just got, it was all over, literally national and international news. And I was on every program, and my face, was out there. So then that case moves forward and ends up in the Supreme Court, right? And Peter Shea, again from California, did the oral argument in the case. And then months go by, and then in 1981, I get a call from Virginia Tice, because no computers, no cell phones, no internet, no nothing. And I walk into my office, and they tell me, Virginia's on the phone. And I took the phone, and she said, hey, Linda, you want to gloat? Can we come over, and you want to gloat on TV? I said, for what? And she goes, you don't know? I said, no, what? The U.S. Supreme Court just ruled in your favor in the school case. I literally dropped the phone receiver. I was in such shock.
Judge, is that Plyler v. Doe you're talking about?
That's Doe v. Plyler, yes. Yeah. And I literally couldn't believe it based on that.
That's a great story. Judge, I remember reading Plyler v. Doe in law school, in constitutional law class, the 14th Amendment. And to be honest with you, I almost cited it recently when I was running for state bar president, and put it out there that I, was a legal permanent resident when I became an attorney, and David Hall hired me. And there's actually an attorney, young guy, probably up north, that some other people from the local bar told me to ignore, who asked me, how were you a licensed practicing attorney before you were a citizen? Kind of like I'd done something wrong. And I was thinking, have you read Plyler v. Doe? I do 14th Amendment stuff. So it's amazing that even nowadays that mentality happens, but it's amazing to know that you were part of that historic decision. It's still cited out there in constitutional law courses.
And Judge
But
Yanez,
yes,
Judge Yanez, what I find so fascinating, and Pablo, these stories that Judge Yanez is telling us, I mean, happened some time ago, and then you flash forward to today, and it's almost like the same fight that Judge Yanez fought is now being fought today. What are your guys' thoughts like on that? Do you think that the fight has changed, like Judge Yanez, or?
well, it's I've been watching Sister Norma Pimentel, right? Who just was named by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most powerful or persons in the country, right? And Sister Norma was a young nun under Sister Juliana Garcia, and the Diocese of Brownsville had created Casa Oscar Romero, which became a refuge for the refugees that were coming in the 1980s. There was armed conflict in El Salvador and in Nicaragua at the time, and especially in Nicaragua at that time, in the early 80s. I really didn't know anything about it until I got a phone call from this kid who tells me that he's about to be deported, right? And I'm like, okay, so that was not a uncommon phone call. But he says, we're all going to be deported tomorrow, and they're going to put us all on this plane. And I said, okay, but I need to get information from you, and we need to go before a judge. And he goes, oh no, we already did all that. And I'm like, and I discovered through that phone call, because this was before anybody, there was no Casa Romero at the time, there was no Proyecto, there was no nothing, right? And he's telling me about how they would take groups of people, and there would not be lawyers. There would be a federal magistrate. And they had an interpreter who would say, you admit that you came in, you admit, and they were being detained based on their responding in those proceedings in federal court and they all waived everything, but they didn't know they were waiving everything. That was going on at that time. And anyway, this case, this guy that calls me, I'm like, wait a minute. And when he's explaining to me what was happening to him, David Hall and I filed for a restraining order. And we literally went to Judge Vela's house, and he was mowing the lawn. And he looked at it, and he literally ordered and stopped that deportation. And that's when we found out about all these refugees that were at the camp in Bayview. And we never heard of that because there hadn't been asylum cases. We had been really handling Mexican type of immigration cases. And that led to my refugee work. And as a result of that, we started filing asylum claims, and more and more people were coming. And then the diocese got involved and opened up Casa Oscar Romero with Sister Juliana, and Sister Norma was her assistant. And at that time, you couldn't get a single elected official or a single public elected person to go to Casa Romero. They would not even look at Sister Norma. They thought they were a bunch of socialists, and what were they doing? And I was the socialist lawyer that was, helping nuns. And so Sister Norma and I have a very long history before the work that she's been doing over here in McAllen now. And I find it so, I don't even know how to describe it, when I see everybody, such a different reaction in the second round of refugees coming in, and the mayors and the congressmen and everybody trying to take pictures with her and trying to be there, when there was a time that those doors were shut in our face.
You know, when I started practicing law, the same thing. I mean, it's a cyclical matter. Like Efrain talks about, that we have to always be present about the violation of our constitutional rights. It can happen in many different ways, and we got to be ever present about that. But I do remember, like in my own lifetime, in 20 years of practicing law, and talking about defunding legal services, and now we have the Supreme Court of Texas, completely conservative, supportive of legal aid in every way. The biggest supporters out there, and it's a cyclical matter. But on the issue of the cases you fought for, and going back to the point you made, you're very humble about it. You got noticed because of the work you did, because you wanted to do that, and you were honest about it, and you were like passionate about it. And I think that sometimes it's lost in the current generations about instant gratification or measured by money being made, that if you do a good job and passionately do it well, and you don't get paid much money, but you do it well, you will eventually get noticed. You will eventually have somebody come around and saying, you should be in the courtroom, you should be a judge. And I think it's lost now a lot lately in some generations.
I agree. And I tell young people now that if you are a lawyer who's honest and with integrity and disciplined and dedicated, it will come across, and your colleagues will know that, your judges know who's who, you know what I mean? And it matters. And I say that a good lawyer will be a good judge.
Interesting.
And the reverse is true. We have some very ambitious people who, just want to be a judge. And I was one of those people who never aspired to any of that. I never did. I was doing my job.
Did you ever, Judge Yanez, did you ever find it hard, it being very difficult to be a judge? Because me and Pablo, as advocates, we always tell ourselves we're going to advocate, and it's always, if something bad happens or if it goes the other way, that's on the judge to make these difficult decisions. If evidence comes in, or if it's excluded, or if the child gets to see their parents. How, as a judge, how would you make those difficult decisions? What would it come down to when you would sit there?
I've made them. I've made all those decisions. Because on the Court of Appeals, it's general jurisdiction. They hear civil and criminal cases. I heard every imaginable kind of case. And if you're a judge with integrity, you take the facts as presented. And I tell, when I teach at CLE, and I explain to lawyers, I say, remember, we are limited to the record. We are limited to your presentation. And that's also true now that I'm a trial judge. Believe me, there are times when we're in trial, and I just want to grab a lawyer and say, why don't you do this? Or why did you just do that? And I have to keep my mouth shut, because in lay people, I explain to them, is a trial a search for the truth? And I say, it isn't. It is an adversarial proceeding in which each side does hopefully their best, right? And presents their case from their perspective. And then the judge has to make a decision based on that evidence. No matter what you feel and no matter what you think that maybe this is, read between the lines kind of thing, or what's behind that, we can't do that, right? We have to make a decision based on what you present to us. And if you don't give it to us, we can't consider it. And that's both at the trial level and at the appellate level. At the appellate level, it's the record. And if it's not there, and believe me, there were times when I was reading the record and I thought, oh my God, why didn't they say this? Or why didn't they do this? You know what I mean? And there was nothing I could do. And I ruled in ways that I didn't think was the right, that I would have done differently if I had had a different record, and if the evidence had been presented correctly, and if they had, and I tell lawyers, and at the appellate level, we can't fix your mistakes. So my point being that those are the limitations of judicial review of something, is that it's based on the evidence. It's based on the record. It's based on the application of the law to those facts. And so it matters how well presented the case is by the lawyer.
I think Efrain kind of mentions that, and I've thought about it, being the judge and not be able to try a case. I like the trying of a case. I like presenting it. I would be in front of a court. Maybe it's just something inherently wrong in my psyche that makes me want to do that. But I would feel that it would maybe weigh heavily on me to have to make a decision on a daily basis. But I see what you're saying, Judge. I mean, it's what is in front of me. And I take it in kind of the same way I take a client's case, absorb it, and kind of come back with something. You present me this and I'll give it back to you. What I find interesting, and I wonder about this, in a court of appeal scenario, you've got 2 or 3 other justices in the panel. Did you have to then at that point start within that small group then doing your own kind of advocacy for your point of view to come into an agreement as opposed to just the one person in the trial court? Like, was it hard to adapt to that kind of discussion?
Well, I wasn't a trial judge first. Remember, I was an appellate judge.
That's true.
First. But let me tell you, you raised a couple of interesting points. And among judges, among appellate judges, it's like, oh no, you really don't want a trial judge as an appellate judge because they're so used to making decisions by themselves, right? And then when they first get on an appellate court, that's what they do. And this is what people need to understand, the lawyers or anyone needs to understand. The most influential judge on an appellate court is the one who can get the votes. So you can be a loner and believe whatever you feel that you want to do, but if you can't get the other judges, you're just going to be a dissenter, right? Or you're not going to get them to go along with your case. So you have to know that collegiality is also substantive to persuade the other judges, which brings me to your question. Yes, an appellate deliberation is having the assigned judge, the writing judge, advocate for the position that they're taking in the case. If there's a give and take and that there is an agreement at the very beginning, right? Most of the cases are agreed upon, but it's like anything. Then there are the hard cases where you have to advocate. And this is one of my last war stories, but you're going to like this one. We had a criminal case in which the defendant had been convicted of murdering the stepfather. And he had schizophrenia. He had had an episode, and the mother had taken him to the emergency room, and the emergency room hospice let him go because they didn't know what to do. He goes home, and that night he kills actually, I think he killed both of them. He put them in the truck, and he takes them to an emergency room, and they're already dead, right? It was an insanity case, right? And so I was, in that case, I wrote it as that he had made the case. The other judges didn't agree with me, so I lost, and I became the dissenter in that case. So mine was the dissent, and the other judge, somebody else, became the writing judge in the case was handed down. I felt so bad about that case. I really did, right? And remember, at the appellate level, we don't see the parties. We only see the lawyers. The lawyers argue, and we don't see the people involved like we do at the trial level, where we have direct, contact with the people. So time, passes, and I get a call from my law clerk, Cindy Pollinard, and she goes, "Judge, where are you?" "Well, I'm at home." "Get on TV right now." put it on A&E. And I'm like, okay. And I went on television, and they were doing a piece on the insanity defense. And they had 3 cases. One where the case was pretty weak. One where kind of, and then one where they felt that the defendant had really made the case, right? And it was that case. It was my case, right?
That's interesting.
And I'm like, oh my God. So I saw the defendant for the first time. I saw him on TV. And when I saw him being interviewed, he was in jail and they were interviewing him. And he was on that phone, with the blast between them. And I saw his demeanor. I knew that I was right. I knew that I was right because I felt that he felt the remorse when he was saying, kind of like Andrea Yates, when she killed her children. When they made her well, she stunk because she realized what she did, right, to her children. Well, that's what I felt about this case. And I just felt awful because I knew that I had been right, but what could I do? And the case went up to the Court of Criminal Appeals. Time goes by. I'm getting ready to go speak at a bar luncheon here in Hidalgo County. And Cindy comes into the office and she goes, Judge, I need to tell you, I said, I can't, Cindy, I'm running late. I got to run over. I'm going to go speak to the bar at a luncheon. I got to go. No. Sit down. I'm like, okay. And she says, the Court of Criminal Appeals just ruled. And the name of I have it in my head, and for some reason I'm drawing a blank right now. And I said, oh, Cindy, I don't want to talk about it because you're going to depress me and I got to go give a speech. She said, no, they reversed the court on your dissent.
Wow.
And they remanded the case. I started crying. I was like, what? And this is a 9-member Republican court, as you know. I was shocked. I was stunned. And I left.
You know what, Judge? I actually was at that bar luncheon. I remember you getting there and you telling us about it to the small group you were.
Yes, I was completely blown away by that decision. And so it's moments like that, Efrain, when you say, wow, yeah, this is why I went to law school.
The lady behind you, too, by the way, is known as a great dissenter, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So I'm sure some of those dissents are probably going to be taking a close eye in the next few years. But sorry, I just wanted to mention that. It's a great story.